This takes us to the period of the 31st of May this year, so obviously a few months ago that period ended. I would note that, and councillors would see from the report, that this encapsulates a whole range of committees that are in an advisory capacity across a range of areas of council's work. It doesn't encapsulate every single forum for of community involvement, because of course we have some committees such as the Bundoora Homestead Board of Management and others that actually have different platforms for this sort of reporting process. Just briefly though, just in relation to the work that falls out of this review, there is also currently obviously consultation underway in relation to community advisory committees, community engagement and those processes. And obviously the key thing here in relation to that community involvement is that by virtue of looking at the work that's being undertaken by community advisory committees, such as those listed here, the question we're always asking is, are we making best use of people's time in these processes? Are we making best use of people's expertise in these processes? And I would note that in relation to some of these advisory committees, they are comprised of representatives of the community in the broad sense, people who have an interest in an issue. In other cases, people are on there largely for their expertise, subject matter expertise. So I just wanted to probably thank the work of all those committees. In terms of council's future communities framework, that's a separate matter that will come to council in the future, but we greatly respect and admire the work, and as councillors would have seen this evening, our committees such as the Darebin Nature Trust and obviously all the other ones listed there are deeply involved, deeply responsive, are often operating as our critical friends as well, so they make the point to say we want you to go further in this area, and I think we all as council value that as well. So I just wanted to end on that point.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Lasserf.
As Councillor McCarthy alluded to, our advisory committees are a really important community engagement tool in ensuring that the community's voice is embedded into the work of council. I won't go too much other detail, just to say though, a special shout out to the Darebin Aboriginal Advisory Committee, who has been doing some exceptional work for a very long time, but I'll say over the last little while, that culminated in the inclusive event, I'm going to get this wrong, Nulu Nanyan, that was held yesterday at the Ray Brabham Gardens. I think that the event yesterday, I guess, was a perfect reflection of what happens when our community gets together and wants to work together. So I commend the Aboriginal Advisory Committee for their work on that event. That event obviously came out of our January 26 resolution in making sure that we celebrated our community in a way that was inclusive for all. And I guess it just shows a shining light of the work of our community and our community advisory committees. Also like to obviously commend the work of officers. It was a big event to pull off as well. I've also, in closing as well, I've also sat on a number of these advisory committees, and the one thing that I take away from it is that our community is full of passionate people across a variety of different issues. They're not only passionate on these issues, but they're experts most of the time, and it's important that we give them an avenue to, I guess, a way to share their enthusiasm and their passion for the things that they care about locally.
Thank you, Councillor Lasserf. I'm going to make the rather unusual move of requesting a small change of the mover and seconder. On page 474 in the Darebin Domestic Animal Management Reference Group, it has Councillor Lasserf down. I believe that's actually myself. Or are you still
no, I believe I'm the proxy for that group.
You're the proxy? And, okay. I won't propose anything.
You could have a go next year.
Are there further speakers? No? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you. That is carried. That now brings us to item 9, consideration of responses to petitions, notices of motion and general business. There is none. Notices of motion, 10.1, Donathan Dole Reserve Oval Playing Surface. Councillor Lawrence. I'll just ask, is there a seconder for that? I'll take it as moved by Councillor Lawrence. Is there a seconder?
For the purposes of debate.
Okay, I saw 3 hands up on that side, so Councillor McCarthy, thank you. Councillor Lawrence.
I've just got a question before I commence. There's some advice being supplied by officers on this motion that's classified as confidential. So can I get some guidance about how I'm going to talk to the motion when the advice is confidential?
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. So I'll just ask, in relation to the advice came, I think, from Ms Olivier. Is there anything that Councillor Lawrence is not able to talk to?
Through you, Mayor Rennie, I actually think this relates to the sporting use of that oval, and so I might refer it to Ms Guglielmo.
Ms Guglielmo.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. I think I'd need to take this on notice in terms of the amount of information that we could provide Councillor Lawrence, depending on the detail.
Thank you. So I think that won't help Councillor Lawrence, who has a question immediately relating to what he's able to talk to. So I'll ask for Mr McMahon to Mr Martin.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. My understanding of the practice of council is that officers provide advice on notices of motion that is circulated to councillors in the week and a half before they come to council. And we provide that to assist councillors in understanding the full gambit of a notice of motion. In terms of the confidentiality of those, I think the practice is we provide it as a confidential on green documentation. However, not being particularly familiar with the comments on this one, I'm not quite sure if they were confidential, but I believe they're provided to councillors as background. If they are provided on green paper, my understanding is. But if perhaps it's a bit difficult through you, Mayor. I'm not quite sure what Councillor Lawrence wishes to raise.
Well, I've got a supplementary question then.
Yes.
It's a procedural one. Given that we've got a mover and seconder in the middle of a motion, what's the procedure for me to move a motion that we make that document on Donath a public document so that we can talk about it freely?
I'll have to refer that to Ms Wilkinson or Mr Martin.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, the practice of providing background information in response to noms submitted by councillors is a relatively new one, 12 months or so. It follows a protocol that was considered by council and supported. Prior to that, councillors weren't receiving any information in relation to notices of motion. That material, in the same way briefing papers are confidential, is provided in that context. So it's provided in a briefing, and in that sense it's confidential. It's specifically confidential if it relates to a notice of motion that has been declared confidential, so under no circumstances. My view is in the same way that councillors can refer to information using their discretion within, conflict of interest and confidentiality provisions. You can use that, but to release that paper specifically for the public, my view is that that's not appropriate because it was provided in a briefing.
Thank you, Ms Wilkinson. So, Councillor Lawrence, you're, as I hear it, able to use knowledge that you have about this matter. Some of that knowledge may be knowledge you gleaned from reading that paper. And you obviously had knowledge prior to writing this notice of motion, so...
My supplementary question, though, is, well, it's the same question, is, supplementary question. I believe this council has the power to vote and make the briefing document public. And I'm just asking what's the procedure in terms of that we're midway through a motion.
Thank you, Ms Wilkinson.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, if council wanted to consider a motion to release that, then that would be up to council. My advice to council would be, though, that would be a very dangerous precedent. I note that the notice of motion calls for a report and on that basis, it may be that the information that Councillor Lawrence is seeking to have put into the public domain could be made available through that report in the event that the notice of motion was supported.
Thank you. Councillor Lawrence, do you wish to speak to the motion?
I will, Mayor Rennie, because I seem to have, reached an impasse there in terms of the secrecy here. But I'll address my motion, my comments now to the motion without reference to the report, because I'm still, concerned when something's a Section 77 item that maybe I shouldn't read it out and shouldn't refer to it. I don't know what contract matters are in there and what's not contract that would require someone sorting those things out. Notwithstanding that, obviously I've been associated with this playing field for a long time, and I was pretty alarmed to see the state of the surface there and the state of the topsoil and how people have battled through with that. And that's really, there's been concern from the community on this, and that's why I brought this to the attention of the council to get a report. And, this is a very important playing field. It services many people coming from disadvantaged backgrounds, and we really can't have a substandard outcome up there.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor McCarthy, do you wish to speak as the second?
Actually, before I speak, I just have a question, actually, just in relation to the wording of the motion. It does say that officers prepare a report for our next full council meeting, which I know it would be on the 23rd of September. I'm just would seek advice from officers about whether that's a realistic timeframe or whether an amendment should be called to make that possible.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. I'll ask the CEO to respond to that.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, it's always preferable if councillors seek advice from officers before submitting noms, but I note this is the second time that this notice of motion has been provided. Councillor Lawrence unfortunately had to withdraw this last time, so on that basis we'll absolutely make it work. Usually more than 3 weeks would be better, but we'll absolutely do everything we can to make sure that's provided in the event that council supports it.
I wonder if I might ask a question of officers in relation to how this fits in with the piece of work that is currently being undertaken looking at all sporting infrastructure throughout the city.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, it is relevant. However, the way I read this notice of motion, it's to understand specifically whether or not there's a particular issue associated with this reserve. And I feel confident that we've got the staff expertise to give good advice about whether or not there is an urgent need for an intervention, as opposed to a sort of more strategic level of investment across the city.
Thank you. So, Councillor Lawrence, you've spoken as the mover. Councillor McCarthy, do you wish to speak as the seconder?
Look, only just to say that not being familiar with the particular issue that Councillor Lawrence is referring to, I don't have a problem with us receiving a report in relation to this. I would note that there are a whole range of other priorities in other parts of the city where other playing surfaces may experience issues. So if there is a need for action, an urgent action, as indicated by officers in the report, then I'm open to receiving that. But obviously, we need to get a report in relation to that first. So happy to see the report, but I'd be interested to see what the advice is.
Thank you, Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I'll be speaking against this proposal because we do have a pretty active Jonathan Dole Community Reference Group, which we've been working with over the last 2 years or so about implementing the Jonathan Dole Master Plan. And we've had a lot of conversations about that, about what the priorities are for that group. And the things that we've talked about in recent meetings have been things like wetland design and update, what's happening with the Cheddar Road crossing point, shared paths, etc. And we approved in the budget $120,000 for the implementation of that master plan. So what's that included? That's included things like concrete path works, picnic area and tree plantings. We had a planting day in June with planting 400 plants, and there's also been more planting of 120 trees along Cheddar Road. So for me, having been an active member of that reference group, the Donath Oval number 1 has not come up as a priority for that group as yet. And I would also make the remark that we did allocate $15,000 to the Keon Park Football Club for lighting design at Jonathan Dole, and also for their storage in the budget process. So for me, because this hasn't come up in the reference group yet, I don't think this is the right thing to do at this time. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Are there further speakers? No. Councillor Lawrence, you have a right of reply.
Yes, Madam Mayor. I would note, in regards to the Jonathan Dole Master Plan, it did go through a budget process that had $200,000 trimmed from it from the original officer's report. It's a large area, and the wetlands is very significant, and also a safe crossing there is very much needed and is a bigger issue, and that's from another budget. But these kind of maintenance of our basic sporting facilities aren't dependent in other parts of the city on master plans. They actually happen as a routine, but it's sort of, you know, the legacy of the forgotten ward, I suppose, that where the people of lowest socio-economic and most disadvantaged backgrounds are running sporting fields, the priorities seem to slip away, and that's why it's been brought up here.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? And against? That motion is carried. That brings us to the end of notices of motion. We'll now move to reports of standing committees. There are none. Assemblies of councillors. Moved by Councillor Lasserf, seconded by Councillor Messina. All those in favour? Reports by Mayor and councillors. Moved by to the Mayor and councillors. Reports, yes.
To adding that I attended the open space tour with the members of the Darren Nature Trust and opening of the Simply Indian on High Street, which I've already given to the officers.
Okay. Happy to move with those additions. Thank you, Councillor Williams, and seconded by...
Question?
Yes.
Oh, no, there's a duplication on mine.
A duplication, we'll just take it out. Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Something's down twice. Okay, so we'll note that there's a duplication to be removed in Councillor Lawrence's. So seconded by Councillor McCarthy. All those in favour? That motion is carried. That brings us to consideration of reports considered confidential. There is a confidential item. So members of the public...
Sorry, I'd just like to move a motion that we close the meeting to the public.
Okay, so moved by Councillor Lasserf and seconded by Councillor Williams. All those in favour? So to members of the public...
Mayor Rennie, Councillor Lawrence didn't vote in favour of that motion, so I don't think the vote was complete.
I